So Tara Campbell, we're so excited to have her with us this evening. Thank you so much for being here, Tara.
My pleasure.
She's got a BA in English, an MA in German. I had no idea. That's really cool. And an MFA in creative writing from American University. She's, I love what you say in your bio and your website. She has demonstrated an aversion to money and power, as many of us writers have. She's originally from Anchorage, Alaska. She's also lived in Oregon, Ohio, New York, Germany, and Austria. And she's currently here in DC. She's the recipient of the following awards from the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities: the 2016 Larry Neal Writers Award in Adult Fiction, the 2016 Mayor's Arts Award for Outstanding New Artist, and Arts and Humanities Fellowships for 2018, 2019, 2020, and 21. Wow. Those are really competitive too, not easy to get. I've actually served on the board for the DC fellowships one year. It was a lot of fun. She's also a 2017 Kimbilio Fellow.
Kimbilio Fellow. I can talk about that as well.
That's really cool. And winner of the 2018 Robert Gover Story Prize. And these are all, I mean, you have a bunch of budding writers in here. So these are all interesting things that they might want to hear about as well. She does have her MFA from American University. So I've been talking with a couple people about MFAs in the area, and American is a good one. So you can also ask her about that. And she's taught with American University, the Writers Center, Politics and Prose, and the National Gallery of Art's Writing Salon. That's cool. And I thought I would read a few comments from my students. They did a little bit of reading of some of your stories online for tonight, and I thought I would read some of their comments. Campbell never directly tells the reader what exactly the point of her short story is. I find this to be an interesting approach that I would be wanting to try. Her topics make you think about exactly what she's trying to convey to the reader. She has a talent engagement with her pieces that I would also like to try to employ in my writing. Her stories seem to focus on the most random topics, like finding the perfect sticky note or a spleen showing up at your front door. These topics might seem abstract and unrelated, but Campbell has the ability to make a quick-moving storyline that presents a much deeper meaning. In the short story, The Notepad, the main character is looking for the perfect piece of paper to write down an extremely important idea. The story is filled with inner thought, limited dialogue, and plenty of imagery, and we soon realize the story is about much more than simply finding the right pad of paper. I like to believe that Campbell is teasing the reader with the thought that these inhuman characters do, in fact, own human physical characteristics. The way Campbell places her characters in situations shows a mastery in storytelling. In each story, the characters start off in one position, but inevitably end up in a new position, whether intentional or not. So let's give Tara a warm Zoom welcome. Thank you so much for being here, Tara.
Thank you so much. And I feel like you've already done the work. So good night, folks. I'm just kidding. I will read. So I just wanted to start out by thanking you, Holly, and thanking all of you for students for coming tonight. And, you know, as with Zoom, it's always a bit of a strange thing to just sort of speak and not really see what's going on in the room. But that's so I appreciate those comments all the more to sort of see what you folks are thinking. So I write primarily speculative fiction and flash fiction. And I'm sure you've spoken about both in class. Speculative fiction I enjoy because it is an umbrella term that lets you float between these various subgenres of sci-fi, fantasy, fabulism, fairy tale and myth, even horror. And the utility of that umbrella term is that you don't have to adhere to rigid definitions. And someone coming from Alaska is used to not adhering to rigid definitions. So, so that's an area I enjoy playing around in, and I've been gratified to see that the popularity of the genre is increasing. Even among literary circles, they're sort of like dipping their toe into the speculative pool and seeing how much fun it can be and how much you can do with it. And as your student said, you can be indirect and say very meaningful things, but you don't have to sort of be in your face and on the nose about it, so to speak. So flash fiction is another form that I found myself gravitating to, and that's basically creating a complete and satisfying story in 1,000 words or fewer. And I don't know if you have experimented with writing flash fiction in class. Um, okay,
Not
so
yet, but I would encourage my students
yes.
to. It's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, to give you a visual, it's basically 4 pages of double-spaced fiction. And so it is a challenge to, exactly as Shaylin put, it is a fun challenge. It's a limitation that writers often place on themselves to make sure they are being the most efficient they can be with language, and to make sure that their images and their verb choices are saying exactly what they want to say, and no more, no less. So so that's a form I enjoy challenging myself with as well. Although ironically, my first book was a novel, which I never set out to write. I got interested in this question, and or this topic about trees and plant communication, and I had so many questions about it. I just kept writing until I suddenly had a novel. But I don't know if I'll ever be able to do that again. So um,
Let me just say before you continue, I'm going to put links to Tara's books in the chat so you can check them out through her website. Please order copies. They're fantastic. I've read many of them. Not all of them. You've written quite a few, more than I even
somehow I
realized.
have, yeah.
But you will not be disappointed.
I really appreciate that. I have had the good fortune to be able to write about the things that interest me, and to find publishers who are interested in publishing somewhat random arrays of fiction. So yeah, so that, for me at least, that has been a strategy for success, just writing what your passion is. So I will stop rambling. I will do some reading, and I am happy to answer questions at the end of whatever you would like to hear more about. And as I read, for accessibility, I will copy what I'm about to read into the chat so folks can pull that up. And this is one of the stories that you mentioned, the spleen. So I will start with that. And I'm reading on screen here, which I am still getting used to. So here we go. The spleen. I was expecting a package that day, so when I heard a knock at my condo door, I opened it. No one was there. Then I looked down and saw a piece of meat on my little raffia welcome mat. It was a purplish, wet-looking organ shaped like a palm-sized kidney bean. I didn't freak out at first because I assumed it was one of the dog's toys. The people down the hall have a dog, and sometimes he leaves his toys in the hallway, a squeaky rubber steak or a slobbery ball. I lifted my foot to scoot the thing off my welcome mat, but then it shifted, angling backward as though it were looking up at me. Good afternoon, it said. I am a spleen. These dog toys are getting pretty advanced, I thought. May I come in, it said, pulsing gently when it spoke. An indentation ran along one prune-colored side, top to bottom, like the first scoop into a fresh tub of ice cream. I thought I should say something, with my mouth already open, but didn't know what. If not, said the spleen, may I simply trouble you for a glass of water? I looked up and down the hallway, expecting to see one of my neighbors with a remote control and a grin. All I saw was an empty corridor with a little wet trail running from doormat to doormat until it reached mine. Nobody's home, it confirmed. All at work, I suppose. It turned to the left and the right as though searching the hallway with me. I'm sorry to bother you, but might I come in? I stepped back from the door to make room. The spleen had been so polite. It waddled over the threshold, leaving a bit of viscous moisture on the hardwood floor before it reached the area rug. My apologies. If you lend me a towel, I'll clean that up. It's okay. But now I was thinking about the rug. Why don't you come into the kitchen? I led the spleen onto the tiles of the kitchen floor, and I leaned against a counter, then thought better of my position and maneuvered closer to the door. It rotated with my movements. I remembered the hardwood and excused myself with a couple of paper towels, wishing I'd grabbed my rubber gloves too. But I didn't want to insult the spleen by going back for them, and fortunately I was able to fold the towels enough times to keep the wet off my fingers. As I dropped the wad into the garbage, I wondered if it was a biohazard. I'd expected organ fluid to have some kind of odor, like meat wrappers, but this didn't smell. On the other hand, some things needed a day before they stunk up the garbage. Excuse me, said the spleen. I closed the garbage bin and turned toward it. I hate to be a bother, but might I trouble you for a glass of water? I blinked at it. Tap is fine, it said. It was so damn polite. How could I not reach for a glass and turn on the tap? Lemon? I asked. No, thank you, but maybe a pinch of salt? I mixed in a twist from my sea salt grinder, then placed the glass next to the organ on the floor. My face flushed. Of course, it had no arms. Sorry, I don't have a straw. Would you mind pouring some over me? Its sheen did seem a bit dull at that point. I thought about the trail in the hallway, the moisture it must have expended waddling from unit to unit, and still it wasn't the least bit cranky, like that expression venting your spleen would have you believe. Just half the glass should do, it said. I squatted in front of it and poured a trickle from the pint glass onto the organ. It turned from side to side the way you do in the shower when you're really enjoying it, like after a workout or a sweaty summer commute. I kept dribbling water over it bit by bit, and a small puddle pooled around the spleen until almost the whole glass was gone. Ah, thank you, it said. I truly appreciate it. I felt a silly swell of pleasure at having been able to help. It tilted down toward the kitchen floor. Oh dear, I'm afraid I've made a bit of a mess. I'll help you clean up. That's okay, it's not much. I grabbed the tea towel hanging from the oven handle and mopped around the organ. Then I dumped the towel into the sink and washed my hands as long as I dared without offending my guest. Well, thank you again, it said. You are so very kind. I don't wish to bother you any further, so I'll see myself out. Wait, I said, drying my hands on my jeans. I mean, who are you? How did you even get here? Oh, I was just here for the open house. Open house? The unit down the hall is for sale. I mean, the spleen was right. I'd seen the posting, but the agent refused to show it to me, though, it said, slumping a little. I was surprised at the prick of disappointment I felt on behalf of this organ. Why? I asked. If a spleen could shrug, that's what it did. I huffed. They can't refuse to show a place, can they? That's discriminatory. Well, I understand the apprehension, I suppose. There was a lot of hardwood, and It tilted down toward the residual moisture on the floor, then back up toward me. But still, my disappointment spiked into anger. That shouldn't matter. The only thing I can think is, are you pre-approved? Yes. Which means you can pay just like anyone else. So that was discrimination. Then something else occurred to me. Did you tell the agent you're a spleen? The spleen seemed to stiffen. After a moment, it said, pardon me? Well, I don't know much about spleens. I swallowed, suddenly awkward. I don't know any kidneys either, to be honest, but I would have thought you were one if you hadn't told me otherwise. Another pause. Should it matter? No, it shouldn't. It just meant I'm pre-approved for well over asking price. There was an edge to its voice now. I could pay a mortgage just like anyone, kidney or spleen. Should it matter? My mouth went dry. I just thought that the agent might have thought, because of what people say about. I went quiet and the spleen straightened itself. Thank you again for the water, but I see this community might not be the best fit for me after all. I put a hand on my stomach. The spleen turned and waddled out the door. I haven't felt at peace since. So I will have a drink of water, just like the spleen. Thank you. And There's another piece online, and I will put the link in the chat for anyone who would like to read along. This one is called My Mother is a Plant. And of course it's not come up yet. So here it is. All right. My mother is a plant. A philodendron, to be exact. At first, people laugh when I tell them, and after a few whimsical comments, the conversation moves on. But the longer you know people and the closer you get, the greater the likelihood you'll wind up talking about parents again. And when my mother persists in being a philodendron, friends and lovers invariably quiz me on how it happened. Do you remember the moment you were born? I ask them. Most will say no, but some will say they've seen video footage of their own birth, which I think would be traumatic, hearing my mother scream to produce me. And how do you know that was you? I ask. Their parents told them. Well, I say, my mother told me too. That's not to say I'm incurious. I've watched my mother, sunning by the window in her maroon glazed pot, wondering how what she tells me could be true. Sometimes at the change of seasons, spring or fall, she decides to give me a sibling. The leaves along one of her tendrils begin to yellow, then dry up. I pluck them off when she asks me to, and when enough leaves are gone, she has me cut off the portion at the end that's still green and growing. I plant it, and about 80% of the time it survives, becoming my new sibling. She even lets me choose their names. I'm running out of counter space for my family. Earlier, she says, she used to bear children directly in her pot, their new green heads shooting up from the same soil. She says that's how she had me, but as I mentioned before, I don't actually remember it. How could I? Once in a while, though, I have a dream where I'm standing in a pot next to her. I'm tiny. I can look up at her, sprawling in all directions over my head, and I'm buried next to her, up to my knees in dark, spore-rich soil. She normally likes her dirt on the dry side, but in the dream we're being watered. I hold on to the tip of one of her leaves as the water washes over us. Her skin is smooth and cool and plump against my fingers. The organisms in the dirt come to life with the moisture, wriggling against my ankles and toes. I giggle and wiggle my legs, and before I know what I'm doing, I work one of my feet loose from the dirt. As soon as I lift my knee, a wave of anxiety surges up my body, bottom to top, and I clutch onto my mother's leaf and feel it crunch in my fist. Then I wake up. I don't know who's watering us in the dream, probably Jim. I've known him as long as I've been alive. He's the one who taught me how to water my mother and who fed me and clothed me and did everything my friends' parents did for them growing up. But he's not my father. I have no father. I'm a product of asexual reproduction. I learned about it in high school biology, which was a while ago, but as far as I know, it's still a thing. Plus, I don't look anything like Jim. He just adopted me. I take more after my mother. That was a joke. I don't look anything like her either. My eyes are brown, not green. My mother wasn't always a plant. Once, a long, long time ago, she was a lovely young woman, which, as in all old legends, meant she was barely more than a girl. And she was beautiful and pure, and the first part excited men, and the second part excited them even more. But she didn't want any of them, so as mythology dictates, she got used to being chaste for being chaste. And one time, as she was being chased, a goddess from the ancient pantheon took pity on her and decided to intercede. My mother's foot hit the ground and rooted, and her body stretched and greened forward, sprouting leaves as she tumbled ahead in a tangle of stems and shoots. The man chasing her tripped on her roots, grasping an armful of air as he fell into the fresh mass of vegetation on the dirt. He found he couldn't get up, and the more he fought to untangle himself, the tighter she held. Sometimes I see myself in her. My eyes aren't green, but I am tall and lanky, so maybe there is some resemblance. But I think that's more wishful thinking, wanting to see something that isn't there. I asked her once what happened to her other original children, the ones born close to her in the dirt like me. They withered, she said. I didn't know how to be a mother yet, so they shriveled and died. I stroked her leaves to comfort her, and my fingers came away wet. The man who chased my mother was never heard from again. But then neither was she, really. She never got to go back to her family or see her friends or grow up and fall in love and learn to have a family of her own. She calls me her first and only success. She doesn't remember how long ago she turned into a plant or what she was called before. Sometimes she tells me her memories of that moment, of tripping and sprawling forward from girl into greenery. She thinks her hair was dark, her skin olive like mine, her dress white and flowing. But perhaps she admits she was too influenced as a child by storybooks with pastel-colored pictures of smiling gods and fleeing women stretching leafy fingers toward the sun. Maybe it didn't really happen that way, or in ancient times. Maybe it wasn't that long ago at all. Maybe it still happens. Maybe not all plants are green. Thank you again. I will read another couple of stories and then see how folks are feeling. Maybe we, want to pause for questions. Maybe we want to keep on going. But I will go ahead and put a new link in the chat. And you might want to take a look at this because this is a piece of erasure work. This is from my book, Political AF, A Rage Collection, which is a hybrid collection of poetry and prose. And as if you are able to look at it on the screen, you'll see that it is a erasure in which words are blocked out with what are bricks, how I imagine bricks might look on the page. Pardon me. The source text of this is the New York Times transcript of the president's speech on immigration, January 8, 2019. So our former president. And apologies if these political leanings sort of don't match yours, but I'll go ahead and read this as an example of erasure. And this is called A Growing Crisis, a Presidential Address. My fellow Americans, tonight I'm a growing humanitarian and security crisis. Every day we have no way to welcome millions of lawful immigrants who enrich our society and contribute to our nation. I strain public resources and drive down jobs and wages. Amongst those hardest hit are Americans and Americans. Every week, our citizens are killed by our officers. Over the years, thousands of Americans have been brutally killed, and thousands more lives will be lost. This is a humanitarian crisis, a crisis of the heart and a crisis of the soul. Last month, 20,000 migrant children were used as human pawns by our broken system. This is the tragic reality of my administration. It's a tremendous problem. Our proposal from Homeland Security includes cutting lawful migration fueled by our very strong economy. Therefore, we have asked Congress to close safe and humane border security. A concrete wall is absolutely vastly more than the $5.7 billion we have requested from Congress. The wall will also be elected president. Congress have refused to protect our families and shut down my administration. This situation could be solved. Get this done. Rise above partisan politics. Why do wealthy politicians hate the people on the outside? The only thing that is immoral is the politicians. America's heart broke, savagely murdered in California, in Georgia, in Maryland, in the United States. I have held weeping mothers and stricken fathers, gripping their souls. American blood shed. To every member of Congress, a crisis. This is a choice between right and wrong, justice and injustice. This is about the American citizens. When I took the office, I swore to protect what will always help me. Thank you and good night. And I'll just continue with one more piece. And I am putting the link in the chat. This is a story that also appears in my collection, pardon me, allergy season alert, Midnight at the Organporium. And this one is called Another Damn Cottage. Cover your ears, the sensitive ones. There's a lot of dams in here. Another damn cottage. It was another damn cottage, another damn grandmother, frail and helpless, waiting for a handout sent by a grandchild. The wolf knocked, ate the grandmother, choking down her stringy, slightly rank flesh. He left a leg, not wanting to fill his belly up. He wanted the soft, fatty flesh of a child to top it off, that plump taste lingering on his tongue. He looked out the window, saw a flash of red in the forest, licked his lips. It was another damn wolf, another damn axe, heavy and rusty. Red grabbed the weathered handle and levered it out of the tree stump in front of the cottage. She sucked in a breath and jammed her thumb into her mouth, new splinter stinging. Another wolf pelt, another mess to clean up, another dead grandmother. But this time at least, something left over to bury. It was another bungled case, another damn vigilante stealing the show. The knight threw down his sword as Red shuffled out of the cottage, a granny's withered leg slung over her shoulder, deepening the red of her cloak. The knight's chin quivered and he dropped to his knees, holding his hands out toward the poor child. She stumbled over to him and slid the weight off her shoulder into his arms. Take this over to the Andersons, would you? She patted the leg. Tell them I'm sorry I didn't get here in time. The knight stared, slack-jawed at the puckered limb, then back up at Red. I'd do it myself, she said, but I've got another call. And this time, I can't be late. Red tightened the string of her cloak and ran off into the forest. Another damn cottage, another damn grandmother, and ever since losing both of her own, always another damn thing to prove. Actually, a note here that you might be interested to try an exercise. So this story came out of an exercise that was in a panel or a workshop at a conference. It's the Conversations and Connections Conference by Barrel House Magazine. And so I was attending, and in a workshop, the workshop leader had us do an exercise where we tell a commonly known fairy tale in the voice of a famous author. So I did Little Red Riding Hood as if Joyce Carol Oates had written it. So that's who I was channeling for this story. So I always want to give thanks to Joyce Carol Oates and Little Red Riding Hood when I write that, or when I read that. So I don't know, Holly, what do you think? Should we stop for questions? How are people feeling?
Yeah, how do you all feel? Do you want to hear another story, or you want to switch to the Q&A? What do you all think?
She should keep going.
She should keep going. You got one or two more for us, Tara?
All right. So yes, I have another one or two, but while I'm reading this, brainstorm your questions, get them ready to rock and roll. Okay. So I'll do two more stories. I'll put another chat in the link. And this is the story that I promised from my upcoming collection. It's called Spencer. And oh, if I still have the power to share my screen, I'll go ahead and share this cover really quickly. And maybe I'll keep that up there while I read to give you something interesting to look at. So yes, there it is. So this story is going to be in the collection that you're seeing on the screen right now. And I'm going to take a drink of water. Whew, the pollen says hi. All right. She could have fixed me. It would have been simple enough. All this could have been avoided if she'd only made an effort. I didn't intend to take much. I only needed something small from her, something she would barely miss, something tiny but useful. She used to find me useful, not in the sense of being necessary, but she thought about me and took me with her more often than not. I used to make her smile. Yet now we find ourselves in this room, you, an officer of the law, and me, the problem that has landed in your office. She's told you that's what I am, a problem, which is not what I had intended to be. I really hadn't thought that far ahead, though thinking now about thinking ahead, I realize how much went into choosing the right one. But I digress. I started with something small, a finger, a pointer finger. I thought about starting with the ring finger, which would have been meaningful, but not as useful. And I didn't want to be wasteful. I was merely trying to do this the best way I knew how. And yes, she did miss the finger, made quite a fuss over it actually, which was annoying considering how long she'd let my bones lie around in a drawer without ever doing anything with them. She never lifted a finger. I'm sorry. The more there is to me, the more levity I feel. The heavier I am, the lighter I am. Isn't that funny? I think it's funny. But no, of course, it's not so funny to you. You're the one who has to figure out how to help her now. If you look at it in a certain way, it's not my fault. The parts were all there, and it wouldn't have cost her much time at all to fix me. And now her neglect has cost her everything, almost everything. To be fair, she did mean to do something. She kept my bones, and she intended to put me back together. All she needed was a little more string. But when you get right down to it, meant to and did are two different things. The difference is I actually did. I took her finger while she was sleeping and I hid it underneath my bones where she would never find it because she had long since stopped paying attention to me. When she woke up, she went to the doctor, really, the last place she should have looked because, of course, the doctor didn't have it. All the doctor could do was ask what she'd done, what she'd eaten, where she'd traveled, everything but what she didn't do for me. Well, the doctor couldn't have known. And she learned to do without the finger pretty well, even as I found that having it on its own wasn't as useful as I'd hoped. I needed a thumb, an opposing thumb. That's what makes all the difference, isn't it? What enables apes and men to accomplish more than all other beasts? Two fingers opposed yet united for a greater good. Without them, it would have taken so much longer to stitch myself together. I took her thumb next, but my mistake was taking the thumb from her other hand. I thought it would be easier for her to get by with only one digit missing from each hand, but it turns out the two I'd chosen were clumsy together. Not useful, not helpful, only full of problems. So I had to take the other thumb too, which wasn't easy. By then, she wasn't sleeping much at all. Yes, her boyfriend was helping keep watch then too, but that didn't work, did it? That never works, not when objects such as myself are concerned. Indeed, I still call myself an object sometimes. I refuse to forget my roots. I won't deny that I began life as a novelty ring, giggled over in a shop in New Orleans. I was once only a silver skull with faux ruby eyes and tiny silver bones strung into a circle with elasticized twine. One size fits all. I could have belonged to anyone, but I chose her. And she appreciated me properly for a while. She wore me to work, out for drinks with friends, on dates with promising men. I was a litmus test in a way. If they didn't like me, they weren't the right kind of man for her. And it worked. I worked. She met her current boyfriend under my glittering eye, and before his unbelieving eyes, he lost her to me. I fully intended to stop after taking her hands. The individual fingers weren't enough for my work, but with full hands, I thought I could find more materials and fashion them into a fitting body. I finger walked her hands through back alleys, mostly at night to avoid commotion, and searched for schools, daycares, parks, anywhere a child might have lost a toy. I wasn't choosy at first. My first body was a stout, bouncing baby doll. My second was a slender Barbie. My face fit perfectly over hers, covering it like a grinning silver mask. But you can imagine the problem right away. Anything that was proportional to my ring-sized head was minuscule compared to my new hands. And even with the strength of sturdy baby doll arms behind them, the hands proved difficult to manipulate. Another difficulty was that I could only show myself in the emptiness of night. People who saw me toddling around as a babe wanted to pick me up and cuddle me. Those who saw me sashaying along as a skull-masked Barbie wearing massive gloves itched to tear off my head, driven by nostalgic childhood mischief, or to dismember me for installation art. Only when they caught me did they see what I was. Invariably, they screeched and threw me down in terror, concussing me on more than one occasion. Your expression, officer, tells me you've heard the reports, perhaps taken them down yourself. Through your revulsion shines a clarity, a relief almost, now that you can see the source of the nightmarish stories. Sitting before you, I must provide a feeling of resolution for you. But for me, you can't understand how unbearable the hiding, the violence, the whole in-betweenness of my existence had become. And so I faced a choice. And so I built. At first, I filched mannequin parts from behind department stores, affixing the battered remnants one at a time, arms to wrists, torso to arms, head to top. I found a hollow, discarded head with a perfectly sized hole in its eye to accommodate me in my elemental self, meaning my actual, not my constructed, self. The head's color didn't match the torso, which in turn didn't match the legs. The arms and legs were also different sizes and possibly didn't match the gender of the breasted torso. In fact, the toes of one foot were slightly pointed, while the other foot remained flat. I walked with a peculiar tilt in my step. Still, I found I could get around reasonably well if I covered myself in coats and long dresses and donned a hat or wig to cover most of my face. But there was always my gait. Honestly, I hobbled. At best, I got my walk down to a mere shuffle and was thus written off as an addict. For that, I was left mercifully alone, which brought peace initially, but soon enough, loneliness. As the weeks dragged on, I was that patient, mind you, weeks. For the weeks during which she retained full possession of the rest of her body, yes, except her hands, I became increasingly despondent. I was in no condition for polite society. At this point, I was something more than a ring on a hand to be ogled, but far less than a being deserving of friendship. The only souls who addressed me were barely present in their own bodies, derelicts too out of their minds to truly fathom the being they had stumbled up to meet. The only eyes that sought mine were distressingly vacant themselves. If the mannequin limbs had been more flexible, if I could have disguised myself more effectively, I might have managed to avoid a reaction of terror long enough to engage in a snippet of conversation, might have tiptoed shyly toward a friendly exchange in some corner of a darkened pub, toward some bit of human warmth. Perhaps, eventually, I might have inched toward acceptance. If any of that had been possible, I might have remained content. But I could never approach places where humans congregate without my gait exciting curiosity, followed by horror. And so I built again. This time, I was no longer satisfied with secondhand, so to speak, materials. I would only be able to complete my project with resolve and at much cost, not only to her, but to both of us. For I am not as hard-hearted as she would have you believe, officer. I too grieved every time I had to re-enter her dreams, now unending nightmares, to take a foot here, a knee there, an elbow, a hip. I tried to focus on joints, thinking it the least invasive way to get the flexibility I wanted from the mannequin appendages. I know you humans have joint replacements. I spend a lot of time watching TV by myself, so I've seen all the advertisements. Indeed, a distressing indeed, a distressing number of them regard litigation for faulty replacements. I took great care to do my research before I took anything from her, and always left behind literature on the most dependable devices to replace what I took. I could have stopped there, I suppose, with both of us as patchwork beings, me a scarecrow of plaster limbs bending on human joints, her a jumble of steel and space-age polymers swathed in scars. We were unique, you have to give me that. We could have both remained special, novel, beautifully obscure beings. But once again, she proved unable to take care of her things. Infection set in. Don't ask me how, but she began to rot as she lived and was in danger of losing the little I'd left her. So wasn't it in the end more responsible of me to take the rest? The very last bit of her is in another office in this building, I suppose, filing a complaint against me right now. Body stolen from head. But if she were to see her body, she'd find it's not what it once was. I've had to make some alterations due to the piecemeal nature of the taking and her negligence, which resulted in infection. It's best she never knows what her body looks like now. It's not hers anymore to decide anyway. In fact, you should let me go now, officer, before she happens upon me, before I decide to start again, fresh, and do it properly this time, all at once, instead of piecing myself together in a patchwork of scraps. Do you mind if I ask how tall you are, officer? Yes, the more I think about it, the more strongly I feel you should let me go right now. But you won't, will you? Pity for you. Thank you. Thank you so much. So yeah, I think I'll let it stop there and let that one sort of linger and creep into your dreams tonight.
I'm looking forward to that. Woo! That was crazy, Tara. That was great.
Thank you for the nightmare fuel.
Yes, absolutely. So what questions do you all have for Tara? You can ask them out loud, or if you want to put them in the chat, I'll ask them for you.
When I had read some of the other pieces that Dr. K picked out for us, when we were like originally looking at some of your work, I was so fascinated by the fact that you were able to create characters and then just almost form the story around them, like with the spleen. And then I was like, I know the Notebook isn't really a character, but like it kind of felt like it was in a way. But I was just wondering, like, when you are coming up with ideas for these stories, do you surround like the story itself around a character that you create first, or do you sort of think of a situation and then think about like what kind of character would best fit that situation?
That's an interesting story, because I usually say that I'm a what if person rather than a character person. But as you were asking the question, I was thinking about the stories that you mentioned, and in those cases, the character did actually come first. So in the case of the spleen, I just woke up one morning and I had this line pop into my head, "Good afternoon, I am a spleen." And so I thought, okay, I have to write this down. And then I started imagining, okay, well, if there were a spleen at my door, I didn't even imagine it at my door. I just imagined the spleen, right? And so I think for me, what helps is to make everything as concrete as possible, as quickly as possible. So I imagined if a spleen came to my front door, the little raffia mat is a thing, and sort of the layout of the kitchen and the concern over the hardwood and everything like that is like how I would react to a spleen at my door. And so I just kind of built it from there, starting with the character, but going very rapidly to the what if question. And the idea of the dual fascination and revulsion is what drove the story at first. And I didn't even think of it as a story about discrimination until very late in the drafting process. So for me, it was definitely a story all about that spleen and what kind of reactions it would engender in the unsuspecting person. And then for Spencer, that also started with an object. I actually do have a novelty ring, which looks somewhat like that, the ring in Spencer. And I did not get it in New Orleans though, so I'm safe. But it was a cheap ring. It fell apart, and I put it on the top of my dresser, thinking I'll fix it. And then, after a year, I swept it into a drawer, thinking I'll fix it. And so that ring is in my bedroom, haunting me from that drawer where it's now trapped, because it demands justice and vengeance. So yeah, I think sometimes objects can lead to stories, but the what if impulse plays a very prominent role in my stories.
So is it still there? Trapped?
Yes, it's still there. I can't open that drawer or I'm done. I'm cooked, so I just keep it closed away.
Oh, I don't think you're safe at all.
That's when you're talking about things that like frighten you. And some people say, oh, serial killers or global warming or whatever. For me, it's always the occult, because you can't close a door or shut a drawer against the occult. So I should be more legitimately worried than I am, but I just have to keep on living, right?
That's true. We learned that the past year. We just got to keep on going.
Exactly.
Crazy. We got to keep on going. Pierre had a question.
Dr. K, if it's okay, I'm going to let Shaylin go first because her question was there first before I raised it.
In the chat. I did not see that. Okay, absolutely.
Which came first, the apartment or the spleen? Well,
hypothetical.
I've been here for, I guess, about 13 years, but I've had my spleen longer, so the spleen came first.
That's great. And I am worried about that ring for you. Have you ever heard of of Japanese folklore? They do believe in a lot of different types of ghosts and spirits, and some of them are the ghosts of objects themselves that, after an object is very, very old, it, in a way, it kind of grows its own spirit or its own kind of soul and its own essence. And if you are not grateful and thankful and take care of the object, it will come at you just like a vengeful spirit, just like a poltergeist.
Right.
It's fascinating. Please keep that door locked.
I think it would go after my husband first, though, because even while Spencer was on my hand, he and my husband would like snipe at each other. So, they had a kind of prickly relationship. So I'm probably not the first in line for vengeance.
So that's your plan for safety.
Human shield. Absolutely.
Your husband's going first. Don't tell him that.
No. Well, he knows. He hasn't forgotten Spencer either.
That's funny. Pierre?
So, Tara, I have two questions. And the first question is a two-part question. So is your speculative fiction, is it symbolic of something? Because you did speak to the fact that the spleen kind of took on, a meaning and, during the drafting process. But when I was reading My Mother is a Plant, there were a couple of theories that were popping around in my head. And I was like, I can't place it and I don't want to be wrong. So one, is your speculative fiction, is it symbolic of something?
Mm-hmm. Well, also with that story, usually not to begin, but I was reacting to all of these myths where, girls are turned into plants or trees. And, basically the women suffer because of the lust of the men, right? And the punishment or this act of saving means transforming the woman and taking her away from her life, right? And she didn't ask for anything. She didn't ask to be pursued, didn't ask to be lusted after. So I was reacting to that, as well as you can see from my wall here, a little snippet of Maxine, That's my plant's name. She has taken over my house. If you could see my walls and my ceiling here and in the front room and in the bedroom, she has taken over. So I write quite often about Maxine or Maxine's sisters. And so plants play a role in several of my stories. And so I was just, I think for me, fairness is a huge issue just personally. And so that finds its way into my fiction quite often. And I just get pissed off at unfairness. So that was kind of my way of working through those feelings of being pissed off about that, ancient, mythical unfairness that hello isn't so ancient and isn't so mythical kind of thing. So that's how that story came about.
Okay. And then my second question is, I'm thinking about American University after Marymount, and I was just wondering what advice do you have for any prospective students? What advice would you give them? What should they, what do you wish you would have known before you did the program?
Well, I really have to say I'm glad I waited. I went back as a non-traditional student, so I just finished in 2019, and as you can tell, I'm not in my 20s anymore, right? So nobody has to answer, nobody has to comment on that, but I will put that out there. So I went back in my 40s, and I went back after I kind of knew who I was as a writer, what I was about, and I knew how I wanted to stretch myself. And if I hadn't gone in knowing that, I think I might have gotten either lost with all of the opportunities or sunk into despair, sort of with all of these different writer identities that I'm simultaneously not occupying. Because nobody can, sort of extend themselves to all of the possible modalities in an MFA program. I mean, that's the point of being there, to be challenged in multiple ways. And if I hadn't already had my identity as a writer, I think that might have just, completely demolished my sense of self. So I went in with a specific project I was working on, and it was a new genre. As you can tell, I don't write historical fiction. And that was the manuscript I was working on. And so I knew I needed some expert assistance. And Dolan Perkins Valdez, who is a brilliant, well-respected historical fiction writer. She has 2 historical fiction books under her belt, and I believe she has a contract for a third. But she's on faculty there, so that was another thing that attracted me to the program. So I was certainly looking for something that could address the writing need, but also I'm based in DC. I had no intention of moving, so I was looking at the area. I appreciated the fact that it's that one can do the program either part-time or full-time, so you have a wide range of people in the program. And a wide range of ages in the program. When I was in my first year there, one of the cohort above me, she was in her 60s and she was graduating. And then I was also in classes with folks in their 20s. So it was a huge range of life experience, working versus full-time, diverse in terms of ethnicity and nationality, and the faculty is also diverse. So these are all things that attracted me to the program. But I also sort of had I was of the mindset that it didn't make sense to go into debt to do an MFA. So I was able to, get a package within my price point to enable that. And so I would also say that as, to anyone looking to go, know why you're doing it, and know that that alone does not create your career. The ironic thing about it was that my novel was coming out during my first year in the program, and people were like, "Why are you here? You've got a novel out." And I told them that's not why I'm here. I didn't want to just sort of plateau as a writer. And I can definitely say my best work to date has come out of that program. Not necessarily, this is the ironic thing. So the stories that I wrote in the program, I mean, some of that has gotten published, but that manuscript has not come together as a whole book, rather as individual stories and excerpts that have been published. But the stories I wrote after that program are my best work, even though it's not anything I would have turned in. It's like flash fiction and like weird little stuff like the spleen, right? But the skills and the focus I got from that program have enabled, sort of unlocked a new level of my writing. And a new intentionality. So it's, even if it's not directly the things I produced for the program, I can see the benefits of the program.
Thank you.
Sure.
Max, you had a question?
Yeah, I had a question about how you start fictional stories, or more how you think they should be started.
Okay.
So do you think just jumping into like the alternate universe and kind of like seeing how it is through that lens is better than, like, I don't know, slowly explaining it, or what do you think is the best way?
Yes, is that no? So how you jump into a story, at least for me, depends on what kind of story I'm writing. So, and all writing advice that's prescriptive is probably not the best writing advice, meaning, everybody has their way of approaching it and their way of jumping in, both in terms of how to start writing and in terms of where to start the story. So for me, when I'm feeling pissed off about something, that usually is not going to make the best story. Although it did with the spleen, or I mean, not with the spleen, with My Mother is a Plant. But when I'm feeling really angry about something, that usually comes out as poetry because of the immediacy, and I don't have to think things through in a linear format. I can just stay with the source of the rage and just, like, flesh that out. If I'm thinking about a what if, that usually turns into speculative fiction, because I'm asking questions about, if I could change this one element of this situation and I'm not constrained by reality, how could I change it and what would happen then? And so that sort of what would happen, the effects of are what, sort of tend to lead to a linear story for me. When I'm telling flash fiction, flash usually coalesces around a moment of change or transformation. And so that change is usually where you start conceptually with a flash fiction story. And then you work back a little bit, but not all the way to the beginning of the process. Because with flash fiction, you generally start in medias res, which is in the middle of the action. So say you have a couple that's been having an argument, a series of arguments for years, or they have a flashpoint, like a thing they never agree on. That could be happening for years, but in flash fiction, you get to the point at which it finally reaches a breaking point and something changes in that relationship. So if I'm thinking about, if I'm thinking about change or new, transitions, that's what usually turns into a flash fiction piece. So it really depends. And the thing I like about that is you can change what you write depending on how you're feeling, right? You don't have to sit down and think, I'm going to work on my novel and I can only think novel thoughts and I can only write novelistic things. That may work for some, it does work for some people, but that doesn't work for me. So I kind of have to go where the energy is. And that's how the pieces decide what they're going to be. And I know that sounds kind of woo-woo, but that's how my process goes.
No, actually, it makes sense to me, anyways.
Yeah, for anyone who writes, that doesn't sound woo-woo at all. That sounds pretty like, you just get in and you start writing and you see what it becomes, right? I've got a question in the chat from Ashley. She wants to know, when writing something emotionally draining, how do you handle the stress?
I think for me, it actually helps to clarify what exactly it is I'm pissed off about, right? So instead of being generally pissed about misogyny or whatever, I can sort of set it down and clarify it and understand it better. and sort of get all that bile out of me onto the page. So when I'm doing it right, it helps actually relieve the stress. Now, sometimes there are just times that you're too, bottled up and keyed up and agitated to do that. And in those cases, I like to turn to other creative pursuits. There's a painting behind me. I used to paint. I used to play the cello. I moved from one form to the next. Oh, and I can share with you one of my recent creative pursuits. If I have my virtual backgrounds. Yes, I do. Okay. So this was another recent creative pursuit. I've called these angry lips. And there is an Icelandic knitter named Jurari, and she knits these lips onto torn sweaters. So she recycles used clothing by putting these lips on sweaters. And so I saw her, she sells her pattern. So I started knitting these, I got a pattern and started knitting these lips. And I can't tell you how therapeutic this was during lockdown. I would just sit there and knit my lips and not listen to news, just take a break and just commune with my lips. So yeah, so some kind of creative pursuit, something to do with your hands, and some kind of like logic puzzle. I was figuring out how to, how do I knit these teeth? How do I knit vampire teeth? How do I knit a skinny tongue? How do I make a forked tongue? And so all these silly little problems were occupying my mind when I was just too overwhelmed by current events to do anything else. So for some of you, it may be running, it may be watching manga, it may be any number of other things, but it's very, I have found it very healthy to have another pursuit that is completely unrelated to writing, just to have somewhere to go, leave it all behind.
Yeah, that's a great point. Other questions you all have for Tara? There's a lot of you we haven't heard from. A lot of you actually had questions in your discussions of her stories. Someone want to ask one of the questions they had? You can put it in the chat too.
Let's see if I have any wisdom or insights to share. Yeah, along the lines of I was saying earlier, is I would encourage folks, if you're not already doing so, to try writing different things and not feel beholden to any one form. So, try writing some poetry. You may have studied hermit crab stories in your class or using found forms. Let me see. I could share a story I wrote in the format of a recipe. So another favorite flash fiction thing is to try, again, the idea of putting limitations on yourself to spur creativity. So, using pre-existing forms like a recipe or a letter or a shampoo bottle or a list of instructions. These are ways that writers sort of put limitations on themselves. So they have to sort of solve this puzzle of how do I tell a story within the confines of a crossword puzzle, for example. Here's a couple. So this one is an essay that I wrote in the form of relaxer instructions. So if anyone out there has or knows anything about black hair, you will know that for years we were sort of taught that we should relax our hair so it looks more like white hair. And so, yes, this was part of my existence for many decades. And so I wrote an essay in the form of the instructions that come with the home hair relaxer all about my relationship with these relaxers and how I kept going back to them, even though I was promising to, honor my hair and so on and so forth. And so putting it in that format enabled me to think about it in a different way and be really specific about it, rather than just trying to write, a sort of a straight essay about that issue. And then Sweet and Sour Christmas, which I'll put up there next, is a story or a creative nonfiction in the story of, or in the format of a recipe, where I talk about my love-hate relationship with going home and, making that Christmas journey to visit family, and, how that changed after the death of my mother. So, this was a way for me to write about the death of my mother when it was still relatively fresh, but do it in a way that I could handle it, that I could break it down and turn it into a puzzle, so I could focus on it and figure out what I really wanted to say about it. So I would encourage folks to, think about something that you care about but haven't quite been able to tackle yet. And, if it's, I don't know. I honestly can't say how people get their ideas for hermit crab flash fiction. Mine, obviously, with the instructions was clear. That relationship was clear. I really can't tell you how I came upon the recipe format for Sweet and Sour Christmas, but I think you'll surprise yourselves. It often happens with looking at the object and then thinking, there's a story there.
That's a really fun idea. I wrote that down. I'm taking notes. Brendan, you had a question. You put it in the chat. Do you want to ask?
Yeah. So I had a question. If I were to create like a fictional story, would it be okay if I were to go back and forth between possibly how I feel, or is that not how I feel? Sorry, I'm trying to think about what I was doing or what I was trying to do. Like tell the story as the person or as a person, and then go back and put it in like a third person view in a sense, or is that just kind of weird and not?
Well, I mean, there are different ways you can play with the narrator. If you're talking about a narrator that's kind of commenting on the action in the story they're telling, that is certainly, it's perfectly acceptable and a really creative way of going about it, and can often sort of allow you to be a little bit, snarky about the action going on, or express your disbelief, or express your shock or dismay as a narrator who is commenting on the story as you're telling it. So, thinking like Mark Twain or even Charles Dickens, they definitely had a narrator's presence telling you the events, but, sort of indicating in the way they tell it and the tone and the details they choose, how the narrator feels about what's going on. If you're talking about like taking a section out to reflect on what's just happened, I'm trying to think of examples. That can certainly happen also. Like a narrator can, do it in the flow of the story, but also take a chunk out and say, by the way, folks, I don't recommend this, or whatever, and you could set it off in its own section. So yeah, there are many ways you can play with that. And I think the nice thing about literature now is folks are open to formal experiments like that. So I would say try it. I mean, it's better to try it and then figure out what's not quite working about it than to sort of not try it and wonder what could have happened. So yeah, go for it.
That's great.
Okay, thank you.
I love that. Just try it, see what happens.
Absolutely. That's what drafts are for. That's
Yeah.
what befuddled review groups are for.
Absolutely, 100%. That's what our class is for, creative writers, right? You try something, bring it in, get some feedback. Shaylin, you had another question?
Yes, I did. I just wanted to say thank you to Tara. I'm saying that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
I wanted to thank you for all of the generous readings you've given us. I know for me, one of my biggest takeaways is seeing how unapologetic you are about yourself and your ideas and your stories. And this is the first time I've ever been introduced to so many pieces of speculative fiction. I've heard the word, but no teacher has like dived into that for me. And you just opened my eyes, because I have a piece that I couldn't share in one of my previous writing classes because it was speculative. I'm realizing now. No. I'm not from Marymount. I'm from Northern Virginia Community College.
Okay.
I wasn't able to share it, but I kept the idea. And I'm realizing now that is a like actual form, like it's valid. Not that you should have to seek validation for any art that you create, but I feel validated now.
Well, I went on a journey to get back to speculative, because when I was in junior high and high school, I was in love with, sci-fi, and not so much fantasy, but sci-fi was my jam, and so watching Star Trek, reading Asimov, reading all the, best science fiction anthologies, and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, all that stuff. I was all in. And then you get to college and you get this impression that you should be more serious, and you should, read actual literature and all that kind of stuff. And, that's what happens, right? I mean, and faculty, of course, want to teach what is the canon, right? They wanted people to know where the tradition comes from, right? But over the years, canon has been changing, definitions of canon have been changing, and I mean, sci-fi unfortunately did kind of give itself a black eye in terms of the literary quality, because often there was a lot of emphasis put on the gee whiz aspect and the invention, and not as much put on character development. Like the characters were the vehicle for discussing the gee whiz cool idea. And I noticed this especially after, having been out of the speculative camp for, decades, honestly, and getting back into it in my 30s. I would go back and read the stuff that I was so enamored of earlier and think, wow, okay, first of all, misogynistic. Second of all, very, very white, very male centered. Okay, it's all about the scientists and not about the actual people that these creations would affect. So, and so I kind of realized why it had been kind of, sort of put over here. But I still loved the experimentation and the ideas of exploration, and not just in space. I mean, the Earth is bizarre enough to last for the rest of anyone's life, right? Under the ocean, in the jungles, there's so much bizarre life out there. I found out about a sea slug that can decapitate itself. If Yo, this is true. So I won't find the video soon enough, but just look for self-decapitating sea slug and you will find it. So like if this sea slug has too many parasites in its body, its head will peace out. It'll say goodbye, and it has this area that's designed to kind of dissolve, and it'll wriggle its head off. It will even leave its heart behind. I mean, if this isn't a metaphor for someone who burns through relationships, I don't know what is, right? But so the Earth is
you can see on this thing is
sorry? Did someone find the link? So yeah, Outer Limits star. I mean, the Earth is the ultimate source of science fiction bizarreness. So, now folks are writing about so many more different things, from so many more different perspectives, and centering so many different people, and really taking care with the actual storytelling, the actual character development, the actual literary value of the work. So yes, I've come back to it, but that field has also changed. And I think as a result, as I was saying before, the literary world is warming up to it and seeing all the possibilities of it. And I'm like, y'all came late, but I'm glad you're here.
No, that's definitely true. Speculative it's a cool thing now, and respected for sure. What other questions? Anybody have any more questions they want to put to Tara while we've got her ear?
All right. Oh, yes.
Oh, so for emerging writers, what advice do you have for emerging writers, new writers that are trying to, kind of carve out their own space in the literary, in the literature field?
Yeah, I think it's a great time for emerging writers because there are so many more publications that are accessible and that are looking for new voices. So, if you're writing speculative fiction, you aren't simply bound to the traditional Clark's World, Asimov's, all of those fantasy and science fiction, the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. There are many more markets out there, not just for speculative, but for, all types of writing. So the first, and I'm sure you've heard this from your professor, the first step to becoming a writer is to become a reader. If you see a story you like, you can take a look at other stories in that same journal and you can just click from story to story. And if you find a journal you like and you think your stuff might work there, you can submit your work. So, once you find your literary people, that's who you can make a breakthrough with. And I know publishers love being, indie publishers love being someone's first publication. You may think, oh, well, they're not going to pay attention to me because I haven't published anything. No, they will pay attention because they love, bringing those new voices out. So certainly do not let that dissuade you at all. But yeah, really just there is a market for just about every story. The issue is to find the right market. And, everybody wants to send their stuff into the New Yorker, but that's not necessarily the most advantageous way to go. I did it myself when I was just starting out, and that was like a little silly thinking back on it. But yeah, read and find your people that you resonate with, and then start submitting.
Yep, great advice. And you all, I have a link with some journals that publish undergraduate work. And I'll point that out to you next class. I think I showed it to you before, but I'll point it out again. Max, one more question before we go. Did you have one more question?
Yeah, I had just one quick question. For the those sweaters with the lips on them, did I see those online or something?
Actually, yeah, let me find the link real quick. Urari. Yes, it is a name like no other. So I will put that in the chat. She does these animated graphics with her sweaters like eating each other, and it's a trip. So yeah, you'll see why that would appeal to a speculative fiction writer. But she has a shop there where if there are any knitters out there, you can buy her pattern. It's very cheap. So you can start making your own unnatural creations.
Awesome. And if you follow Tara on social media, you can also see her. She posts her images of her creations, so you can keep up.
I'll put my Twitter handle here.
I have derived endless amounts of joy from her knitted lips during the quarantine because, yeah, there's so little of joy happening. You see those lips and you just feel a lot happier. And I published the links to her books again too for anyone who's interested. Please check them out. They're fantastic.
The one thing, when I look back at my Instagram profile, I'm like, okay, that was perhaps a little obsessive. There's this chunk you can tell, like I'm full into the quarantine because it's all lips all the time.
All lip. Hey, better than a lot of other things. For sure. Thank you so much, Tara. It was awesome to have you. Great questions from students and just fabulous reading. Thank you. Thank you for being here with us. And so round of applause, virtual applause, Tara.
Thank you so much for having me.
Have a great night, everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.